Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Cash, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Leadership at the Rossier School of Education. We really want to thank you for being part of the 2023 USC Rossier School of Education Leadership Seminar Series. And a special thanks goes out to Tom Artiaga for his leadership in putting together a series of incredible workshops to support our current students, alumni of USC, friends and supporters of education. This is our first seminar, and we're starting with one of our most important topics facing K-12 and higher education, equity. Now, today we have three outstanding educators with us to share their insights on their work, and then we will discuss how they seek to find partners, allies, accomplices in that work to support every student in their schools and districts. Two of them are with us right now, and one will join shortly. First, Dr. Krishna Spates.
Hello. Hi, my name is Krishna Spates. I identify as a teacher. I spent 17 amazing years in the classroom. I'm currently sitting in the seat of an assistant principal, and I feel very proud to serve Palmdale School District.
Thank you, Dr. Spates. Welcome. And next we have Dr. Angela Dillman.
Hi, I'm Angie Dillman, Rossier class of 2022 and classmate of Dr. Spates. Also very glad to be here. I'm currently the principal of Arcadia High School, and I'm looking forward to today's event.
And our third panelist will be Dr. Ben Drati, the superintendent of the Bellflower Unified School District. And as one might expect with a busy superintendent, he has something happening right now in his district, and he'll join us when he can. So we're going to start with our first question, and we'll start with Dr. Spates, and then we'll have Dr. Dillman give a response to it as well. How do you define equity? And then importantly, is that definition that you're giving us common throughout your school and your district?
Okay. It's interesting. I think there's a heightened focus on the word equity right now, but it's truly the work that we're called to do in education. So we are on a constant, exciting, never-ending pursuit to create affirming educational opportunities for students, affirming spaces for them, to prepare them for their college and career dreams. And it's a moral obligation and responsibility that we have. So the name, everybody is hearing and talking about equity now, but our work is the same. Is that common throughout our school and district? I would say it is in ours. We're very fortunate to have a superintendent who has a strategic vision, the Palmdale Promise, that really centers equity for our system.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dillman.
I agree with everything Dr. Spates said. I think that me personally, I believe that my job as an educator, both when I was in the classroom and even more so as an administrator, that my job is to open as many doors as possible to our students beyond high school. It's not about these 4 years, it's about the rest of their lives. And to me, equity is examining how many doors are artificially closed to so many students and doing our best to make sure that those doors are opened and doing everything we can to make sure that for the students who have so many doors automatically open, that we're working to make sure that those are opened for everyone as well.
Wow, great, wonderful. We're off to a great start. So it sounds like common to both of your definitions is this idea of supporting everyone in the schools and in the district. So in your experience, and we'll start with Dr. Dillman and then we'll hear from Dr. Spates. How ready and equipped are current administrators, teachers, and staff to support all learners in the school and the district?
Well, one thing that I think is true of our organization, and really almost every educator I've ever met, is the desire to serve all students. I think that that is the number one most important starting place, that we recognize the needs of all students and that we want to serve them all. But it really is the harder work of recognizing who's not getting what they need. And sometimes that's, from like a single classroom or a single educator, and sometimes that's system-wide. So I think that my organization or educators as a whole are moving in the right direction and beginning to recognize it, but it's a never ending process to serve all students. If we just took 5 years ago, the skill set that we had to serve all students, it's not necessarily adequate to today, given changes in technology, changes in mental health, and changes in the college acceptance landscape. So it's not like a destination. It really is a journey of continuing to reflect and review data and talk to people and talk to our students and find out their needs.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. So, Dr. Spates, what's been your experience about how ready and equipped we are?
I'd like to sort of step back for a second and then move forward to answer the question more directly. When thinking about the idea of equity, and it really is a way that I used to think about myself as an equity warrior, right? And so that's why I was super excited to attend USC because of the clear vision on equity and who I feel like USC develops, right? So those are equity warriors to go out into systems and create affirming educational spaces for students. But in terms of readiness and being prepared, I've thought about this idea a lot. And so I think, we have to really pay attention to context, because if you have the courage to do the work, if we're not careful about how we go about doing the work, then our careers, right, will crash and burn, especially because of the political climate that we're in right now. And so if educators have the heart to do equity, then we need you, right? And so that also means that we need to pay attention to our career and the way that we do things with special attention to context. So maybe how you go about serving kids and removing those barriers that Dr. Dillman spoke about, what might work in context A and may not work in context B. So in terms of how ready we are, I think that's something that is important to pay attention to, no matter what level you're at. So whether you are a new teacher, if you've received permanent status, who you have as your site leadership. If you have Dr. Dillman, she's going to be open to innovation and creativity in how you reach students. If you have somebody else, they may not be. And that's something that we need to be very mindful of. But I think too, like when we think about equity, it's about doing great work. So doing our jobs and doing them well. So I think about our access and equity people in our district. So, one of those barriers was GATE, for example. So now she just says that, we have a universal screener for GATE. So all students by a certain grade level, that's what they're going to do. So that's just doing great work. So doing our jobs well. If you're in the classroom, really paying attention to the standards, but getting to know your students, building relationships with your students so that is the pathway for them learning the curriculum. And that's important. So it may not be sexy, but doing great work is what we can do to really ensure educational equity. Connected to my first point, I also think building relationships at your site and then beyond your site. So with your central office, outside of your system, because if you are really focused on doing equity work, whether you choose to name it or not, sometimes a different narrative will start to be told about who you are. And so I think it's important now, since we have, social media and technology, that you control the narrative, right? So whether that is being strategic about how you use social media, developing a blog, a website, a podcast that I know Dr. Dillman has, you have to share it with us, but being intentional about those things so that you control your narrative, so that when you come against maybe people who may not have the same value of you, there's something else that's sort of countering that narrative that might be attempted to be shared about you. And then the other thing is really policy, learning your district protocols and policies, like what are those levers that you can pull? So our superintendent, Dr. Raul Maldonado, the strategic vision that he created for us, those are levers for us. So I can say, as an assistant principal, like, hey, like we need to, create affirming spaces for our students. We need to create rigorous learning spaces for our students. This is how we treat each other in our district. We have a blueprint for action for African-American students, an English language and learners of standard English blueprint for students in our district. Those are levers that I can pull, so I'm not this lone equity warrior out there by myself. I can say, hey, like, I'm doing what my bosses say, I'm doing what my principal and the directors and our superintendent want to be done. So really learning what are the policies, what are the protocols that exist in your district so that you can use those. And then doing all of that, doing what's best for your students, your teachers, doing your job well, that's equity.
So thank you both. Dr. Spates, you at the beginning of your response, you touched on something that I'm going to follow up on with both of you, and that's the fragility of the potential of some sort of problems if you come out strong as an equity warrior. I'll use your words, which I think are great. So what kind of advice would you have for people who are dipping their toes into or just getting an opportunity to deliver on their values and their beliefs in relationship to equity, but understanding that there might be some political challenges or consequences in relationship to that?
I don't mind responding first. So I think context. So get to know your context. And so what you may, even within the same system, what you may be able to do with your principal may be different from site to site. And so to really take time to feel that out. Two, it is the work that we're called to do in education. Education is equity, right? So finding those barriers, always constantly figuring out what we can do to improve education for students. So it's a long game. And then I think to kind of what I mentioned, looking for those levers that already exist in your organization. Is there a process? Let's say you want to offer a new course. I love master schedule, by the way, but if there's an opportunity to offer a new course, is there a system in place within your district where you can, use that process to get what you need for your students and for your site? And then building relationships. That's everything. So take time and get to know your colleagues and develop trust and develop a relationship and trust with your site principal if you're at the site level, and that's all I can speak to right now, but within your site and within your system. And then collaboration, because we can't do this work by ourselves, and collaboration at the site, within the system, and even beyond the system to see what things other districts are doing that we could do, or what other sites are doing, whether it's a public or private school.
Yeah, your response reminded me of the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Dr. King's quote, I believe from 1961. But you sometimes have to think about the long game. So thank you. Dr. Dillman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if let's say you're new to an organization or you're a new administrator, you definitely need to get to know your community. You need to understand the values of your community and build relationships, and use that time to find who your partners are going to be. You'll see where the work needs to be done, but you'll do very little alone. So find those natural partnerships. You will find other people who want to do the same work, and find the way that even you have to phrase things. Maybe equity warrior will be exactly what one organization wants to hear, and it won't be that phrase that the next, but the work still needs to be done, and those students still need to be served. So I think it's really finding how you do the work within, like as Krishna said, the context where you are. And I think across the country, like, we're experiencing culture wars, and schools and school boardrooms are becoming the battleground. So it's definitely something on all of our minds. And even within LA County, there's different communities that have different expectations. So you need to know where you are, you need to know what they want, and then you need to know how to go about doing it. And it for sure is not going to be quick work. It's going to be slow and painstaking. And if you do it poorly, or if you have a misstep, you could set yourself and your students and your organization back years. So it is much better to go slower to make a lasting impact.
May I add something, Dr. Cash?
Absolutely.
I also want to talk about courage. Well, let's do data. So data first, right? That's another lever that we can pull. So if, a PE teacher comes to me and, talks to me about, student behavior, or things that are challenging sort of after lunch or seventh period, that's great data that I can use and share with my principal and possibly share with like our middle school director to say, hey, like, here's the data. We've experimented, or we have this new idea, like, can we try adding a new PE course, right? Like that one that engages students and they'll want to participate in, and maybe it'll lessen some of the behaviors. So data is one. And then the other one is courage. So I feel like every time, I attempt to do something, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. I'm like, okay, let me just put on my bulletproof. I'm going to get beat up, but it's okay. Because it's not like the absence of fear, like the Instagram quotes say, it's just moving forward with it. And so if you've built good relationships and you've done good work, have courage. It's not going to be easy, but move forward anyway. And I like to say that, fear, I call her she, but I'm like, she's going to leave eventually because I'm going to keep moving forward. So have courage and know that people are supporting you, even if they may not tell you. There are people who are supporting you, and they'll thank you later.
Thank you both. So how will you build capacity for others within your own schools and your district to either, walk through the fear or develop courage or to do the work that needs to do? So how do you do that? Dr. Dillman.
Well, I think that there's, different capacity building in different areas. So for me, it's building capacity in my assistant principals and people who are leading programs to lead the conversation. And Krishna is absolutely right. When you start with things that, are more dispassionate, like data, then the conversation is an easier start. So I think it's modeling how to have difficult conversations. I think it's knowing what you want to achieve. So even just walking through, let's say a department chair, like, what's your end goal? What would you like to achieve, at the end of this year? Or, when we adopt this new curriculum, how will we know if we're successful? So we need to have an idea of what it means for us to be successful and what we want to achieve, and then how we're going to measure it. And then I have to be willing to be in those meetings, having those same hard conversations, having the first hard conversation, knowing when to step in, knowing when to let go. But I think that it's doing the work alongside everyone helps build capacity, because I certainly don't know how to achieve all this. I don't think if any one person did, we would be there. And if it was easy, we would be there. So I think it's learning, trying new things, and being right there with your sleeves rolled up, ready to do the work, and ready to, like Krishna said, take some of those, jabs when we have to, but know that the goal is worth it.
Great. Dr. Spates.
Yeah, similar to what Dr. Dillman mentioned, I think, we have sort of this, I don't know if it's American or if it's in schools, but, fake it till you make it. But I disagree strongly with that. I think it's important to be okay with not knowing, and being okay with situating yourself always as a learner, so that you're open to, open to other people. Like Dr. Dillman said, we can't do it alone. I think the other part, sort of connected to the previous question, is not being afraid of saying no, right? So, and it's connected to courage. And it may be a no the first and second and third time. And sometimes, like Dr. Dillman said, you get that hard no, and it's like, okay, I understand. But through the no's, we also learn more and understand more, and can adjust our path for the future. I think the other thing is unearthing talent on our campuses. I really don't believe that schools and systems, we can't do the work that's required, especially looking at data and looking at the dashboard. And of course, that's only one measurement of how schools are doing, but we can't improve by just doing our job descriptions. And so we have to unearth that talent on our campus, go on a mining adventure and find out where people's strengths and passions lie so that we can sort of align our communities, the adult strengths with the teacher's needs. And so you never know who could be a guest speaker or run a group or teach a class. So those type of things. I also think, collaboration, sharing, from classroom to classroom, creating, if you are a site leader, so creating a structure for teachers to visit one another. So there are collegial visits, it's not punitive, it's not any of that, but sort of breaking down those silos so that we can see what's going, so teachers can see great practices and be inspired by their colleagues. And even being able to do that from site to site, so there are definitely principals in my system and I'm like, can I go to a staff meeting? I just want to kind of shadow and observe them for the day. But everything I learn, I can bring back to my site and incorporate. And so we have to be able to intentionally, I think, create structures and systems to collaborate within the workday. So it's not something extra for people to do. And then I think building systems that are supported. So again, pitching Palmdale can work for us. It's a great system. But again, I always feel like our cabinet, they're very supportive. So it's how can I help you? How can I make this happen? And that trickles down to our principal, who is also supportive. How can we make this work? So building systems that are supportive and support creativity and innovation, because just doing the job description, that's not enough.
So both of you talked about in response to that, how key relationships are. And so I see that Dr. Ben Drati has joined us. Dr. Drati, can you hear us? I think he's still connecting. So I'll ask you guys this question again. So one of the most important things that I've heard you both talk about, and I want you to directly address this, and that is, how can we learn from each other on how best to get our students whatever it is that they need and reach our promise of equity? So what kind of ideas, strategies, techniques do you have regarding that? And we'll start with Dr. Spates.
So a couple of things. One of the things that we set up at our site to actually learn from each other. So this is teachers, right? So teachers learning from teachers. We are very gifted to have some permanent subs on campus now, sort of extending from COVID. So when we have available substitutes available, we quickly build a schedule for the day. We have an ongoing list of teachers who would like to observe their colleagues. And so when we have those subs available, we plug them in and we can look at our list and plug teachers in so that they can actually go visit their classrooms and see what's happening. And so if I have maybe I'm not strong in my content area, but I'm great at classroom management, I can get those strategies, and that's equity, right? That's improving the learning environment for the classroom that I'm going to go back into. So I would say that's one system at the site level as an assistant principal that we do.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dillman.
Yeah, we have a very similar thing, and we're a smaller district, so we do the same thing even with the high school and our 3 middle schools. We do a lot of learning walks, we call them, and we have instructional coaches that their job is to kind of identify those best practices across the district, and then we kind of mix and match teachers with, who have a desire to grow in a certain area. We'll match them. But I think a real area of growth for just the system of education is connecting teachers from other districts. We have a very specific population and we're really good at serving the majority, but we're not necessarily as skilled at serving, other parts of our community. So I think that how do we kind of use that USC model of connections and connecting people to serve our students? And then how do we have those vulnerable conversations of who do we need to serve better and who's doing it great?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Spates.
Yeah, I think another structure would be great too, is looking even at, we get to see as a district, like compare middle school to middle school, so we can see our attendance data, we can see our suspensions, but it would be really great to take sort of that problem of practice method, and then work on it as assistant principals or principals, take an issue they're dealing with, whether it's budget, but collaborate in looking at evidence-based strategies and things that we can try, things that are working at different schools within our system, so that we can all improve. So using the system to better itself.
Fantastic. We have a couple of questions from our guests, and I'm going to take the first one because I think it works in well with what you're both talking about. How do you address teachers who do not see the value of deep reflection to uncover their biases?
That's a tough one. Dr. Spates, do you have a magical answer? If so, please, I need to learn.
No, I am a learner, right? So I was just thinking about a conversation. So this is particular to my context, but there was a teacher who was struggling with a student. I experienced the struggle as sort of an adultification of a young Black girl, where he really personalized the things that she was doing, like she was, planning to do these things. And so I didn't focus on necessarily the bias explicitly. I did kind of try to talk to him about not personalizing the behavior and reminding him that it's a child, right? But we didn't talk about race or his bias that, which I think might have been evident explicitly. We just talked about the behavior, and then giving him strategies to deal with the student. And so we were lucky to have another coach on campus at that time. So it ended up being a conversation and he felt supported and not attacked. And so again, just looking at the sort of the qualitative data of the student, sharing information that I happen to know about the student, so what was going on in the background, and then just giving the person strategies.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think before I say anything more, I'd like to welcome and introduce Dr. Ben Drati, the superintendent of the Bellflower Unified School District. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Drati. As a former superintendent, I certainly understand the vagaries of time in the day for a superintendent, particularly in a district in California. So we appreciate you being here.
No problem.
And we really appreciate your expertise, experience, and understanding regarding the work that we're talking about. Now, and we'd love to hear your response. So this is a question directly from the audience. How do you address teachers who do not see the value of deep reflection to uncover their biases?
Oh, perfect. Great question. So the schools that have secondary schools have a benefit over elementary schools because the student voice will be the one that will bring that out. And students, secondary students have the ability to look at data, unpack data, and make sense of it. So the minute you propose some inequity that occurs in the school, whether it be about grading practices, suspension rates, expulsion rates, the stuff I'm describing are things that would be disproportionate to a school population. That is where you capture them, and you can bring. So if you can capture student voice and bring them to the fold, man, that's the kryptonite you need to break teachers down, because everybody loves students and they all speak on behalf of the students. So often we don't include their voice in it. So the minute you include their voice, I mean, the dynamics change. So the way I would do it is first, make sure you have data that you know where it's going to head to. You have to be the architect of that. Okay, if I produce this data and put it in front of people, what's the response I'm looking for? Really ask that question of yourself, and then look at the constituency you want to propose that to. So what I've done is, in the exact same situation, is You have three constituencies that you often have to deal with. You have parents that have a perspective, and you have students that have a perspective, and you have a staff that has a perspective. And oftentimes we don't access the most important one, which is the students. And if you can get them involved in it, then they'll shape the story. They know the nuances. They know if a teacher is dogging it. They know if a teacher is not doing their best. They have an idea which teachers are boring and not boring, which ones are intellectually stimulating or not. They know that. So I'm not proposing that let's beat up on a teacher or anything like that. It's just you establish a situation in which you allow the data to you present the data and let the students come up with these things. So to me, that's been the most successful thing I've done, is really incorporating student voice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Drati. And the question that Dr. Spates and Dr. Dillman were discussing, I'd like to hear your response to it too. And it's, how can we learn from each other on how best to get our students what they need to be successful? So as a superintendent, what has worked? What have you seen work? What are you working on in creating this learning environment for your district?
First and foremost, I think I think all of us have different positions, so you got to kind of understand your role, right? You understand your role in your sphere of influence. To me, the superintendent is a powerful position if you levy it right to get the conversations going. Not stifle people, but get them encouraged. So the more people that I can get to trust in the fact that they can be their authentic selves and not be canceled, so we can talk, is the most important thing I can do for the organizations as superintendent, right? So there is no dumb answer, there is no racist answer, there is no, don't get me wrong, there's ill-informed people, but we are so quick to say, you didn't get this right, so you must be racist, or you must be sexist, or you must be that. That is a very scary proposition for any staff member, because you want to create conditions that they challenge themselves and service. So what I've done is, first and foremost, allow for teachers to be a part of leading the district. Meaning, I have this concept called the lead from the middle. Lead from the middle, where the principal serves as a facilitator of learning, is a lead learner, and that there's a teacher leadership team that engages in solving problems, and that you bring all issues to them, whether it be about the Bell schedule, grading practices, professional learning, you bring it to them. And then you get to empower them to help you make decisions on where to go, with an understanding that we all have to end up in the same place. I can't have 15 schools that are just islands to their own, but I know the outcomes we're looking for needs to be unified. So I'm the one that expects, with the board, lists out what the expectations are. We want students to do blank, blank, blank. We want that. Really being clear on that, and then assigning metrics to evaluate whether those things are happening. The minute you do that, you live it up to the sites to help with their leadership teams to develop their theory of action, approach it to get there. While the district office then listens to all of that and supports in whatever way they can. The caveat here is whatever they turn in has to be intelligent, right? It can't be, it can't be any old thing. If I want project-based learning, deep learning, I don't want you to just put a bunch of straws together and say I'm doing projects. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about deep learning, and so whatever you're going to propose forward, and the way I catch them is, look, this is what I'm telling you. This is what you're going to have to defend why you're doing this. And I want to support you 100 ways. So don't give me anything that's going to embarrass you or me. And so that's how we do it. You get them in there. During that time, what I've done is I established 4-quarter systems of evaluation to work. Meaning we have a conversation in the fall that talks about, in the beginning of school start, the schools are expected to, with the principal's leadership, to discuss their commitments that they're going to do for the year, and then set the interim measures that they're going to look at to see where they're making progress or not. November, you check on it and you have a conversation. Did we actually commit to our issues? The trends are showing that referrals are African Americans are more than Latinos or than white students. failing grades or this. The interim assessments demonstrate these trends that we want to avoid. During that time, what are we doing differently now? We know it's happening now. Are we going to wait till the end of the year to talk about this, or are we going to solve it now and reevaluate our commitments to see if we need to make adjustments? You have the same conversation in the spring, and then you have a final conversation to talk about, okay, now that we have followed all of this, what else are we going to learn, put together for next year so we can start our cycle again? The goal is each time you ask a deep question, God, but our African-American students are really struggling again. We don't know what it is. Well, have you tried this concept? And maybe the curriculum sucks. It's not as include them in their curriculum. Maybe it's that. Better yet, have we talked to the students yet? Have we talked to the students and say, hey, we see these trends. What do you guys see is happening in this school that can help us change? And I guarantee if you do that, then each year you're going to pick off chunks that you're going to learn from, right? So that's how I got it. But more importantly, you got to have that environment where people don't feel that they can be canceled anytime if they spew something that might be ill-informed. So to me, that's one of the most important things I can do as superintendent.
Yeah, so great answer, and thank you for sharing that with us. Question for the three of you. So I haven't heard you, and I haven't asked this question, but I haven't heard you say specifically equity. You're talking about more system-wide, either at the school sites, which is Dr. Spates and Dr. Dillman, or at the district-wide, more systems issues that, and is that how you see it? That equity gets addressed through that, as opposed to be something separate from everything else? We'll start with Dr. Spates, then Dr. Dillman, and then Dr. Drati.
Yeah.
To be very candid, I feel like in being a Black woman, I can't just say like, hey, like just come off the top saying, hey, we need to look at African-American students, or we need to look at Latino students, because in where I live in the Antelope Valley, that might be construed as, oh, she only cares about these students, even with the data. And so I think canceling happens also for administrators who have the right heart and are doing the equity work. So that's, so my approach has always been looking at systems and levers that I can pull to improve educational outcomes and spaces for students, because the majority of my system, they are students of color and historically marginalized students. And so I feel like by giving them and doing what I can to create educational spaces that they deserve, that I am doing equity work.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dillman.
I would also agree that systems are really important for looking at trends, because I think all schools have really great strategies to deal with an individual. When it gets down to one student, we're pretty good about swooping in and having levels of service to support that student. But it's harder to see, especially when you're in the classroom, it's harder to see the overall trends of, where the equity work needs to be happening. So I think that systems are really important, especially systems to review data, especially as Dr. Drati was saying, regular systems and checking where you are and having, a goal in mind that everybody's working to the same goal, and you might have different ways of getting it, but we're all going to check in throughout the year to ensure that we agree what we're supposed to be doing, we're doing it, and we're moving in the right direction. In my district, I think we talk about equity work. We talk about it pretty openly. And I feel very lucky and fortunate to work in a place where that's the case, but definitely you're careful about the way you go about it.
Yeah.
Dr. Drati.
Yeah. A systems approach is really the only way you can address this issue. And it goes down, and this question digs into what is equity? What are we trying to accomplish with equity? What are we trying to do with it? And why is it even necessary? So you gotta kind of abstractly answer that question to yourself, and then realize what can you control? cannot, as a human being, possibly change Dr. Dillman and Dr. Spates' opinions of certain groups and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I may have influence on information on that, but I'm never going to really change who they are in terms of that. But what I do know is we are all working within the system that we think we're doing the right things. And we need to demonstrate that some of this system stuff that we create is a byproduct of the history of America that is automatically inequitable already. So the textbooks we read, the approaches we do, it's a Eurocentric approach and has a specific outcome. So the design of the system is producing what it's supposed to produce, right? So the only thing we can do is then you got to work on the system to change it. And more importantly, but the systems are the people, right? So if you work through the system, the people can learn through the system to change. So the stuff I described earlier about the conversations and all that, you'll notice that at the heart of it, when the aha moments come, when discoveries come, and then those discoveries come, then changes people, right? So ultimately you're going to change people by working on the system and letting the system demonstrate how we're feeding inequity through the system. So let's work together to enact those things. That way it's not a personal thing on somebody, because if you try to go after people only, then it becomes personal. You don't know people's backgrounds. You don't know what the experiences they have, and it will be a debate forever. So it's really about what are the inequities in the system, and what does the inequity look like and not look like when the system is working right. And to me, it's and if you ask me what that is, Ben, it's about a school system, a school site, or should not be predictive of opportunities or outcomes for certain demographic groups. At the end of the day, that's all we're looking to try to address, and that's what we control. And you have the data to be able to know whether you're disproportionate or not in whatever question you may ask.
So thank you, all three of you. So yeah. In the news today, a Florida elementary school principal has banned the showing of the Ruby Bridges movie, which is a Disney movie that was made about civil rights pioneer. I flashed across my phone and I looked at it and I thought I misread it. I thought, are you kidding me? How's that controversial? But it gets to the second question that our audience has asked, and that is, how do you have conversations with people when they don't even believe systemic racism exists?
I would, and I'll go quickly and let you guys. It goes back to what I was saying before. It's really about demonstrating that inequity exists in the data. To me, that's how you do it, because I don't know if you would change people's feelings on things.
How about if you show them the data, Dr. Drati, and they still don't believe it? What do you do then? What have you done? Because I know that's happened to you.
Yeah, to me, this is where the student voice and other parents' voices come into play.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to go beyond who's in that room to help the people that you say you're representing or saying, no, you're not representing me. I want to read Ruby Bridges. I want to understand. And at that point, you got them. So I happen to think students are probably the most, it doesn't matter what area you're in, they think in an equitable way. They don't want an unfair world. And if you show them inequity, then they'll respond to it.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dillman, Dr. Spates?
Similar to what Dr. Drati said, I don't think that you're going to change everyone's mind. But let's say you're looking at the data and it reveals structural racism, they'll believe it, whatever the cause is or not, but we're still doing the work to address it. And I that's not going to prevent us from moving forward and doing the work. I don't think that it can be our expectation or our goal to get inside everyone's mind and make them think exactly like us, but we're all going to be doing the work and achieving the same goal.
Yeah.
Dr. Spates?
Yes, I would say similar is, I guess I feel like sometimes I don't have to have that conversation if my principal or my director or, the superintendent's expectation is that something happened. I get to use that and just do my job and do my job well. So let's say Avid, right? So if it needs to reflect the students on our campus, I don't need to discuss that, right, per se. I can just do my job and make sure that the students who are enrolled are reflective of our campus. If there were barriers to gate, sort of that I mentioned, one of our directors, she just did her job and removed the barrier and has universal gate screening for all students. And so there's some, if we have those levers in our system, they free us at the site from having sort of a potentially contentious conversation, and we're just doing the work that we're required to do.
Great. So one last question from our audience, or at least of the list I have now, has to do with what kind of strategies would you recommend someone incorporate how could somebody incorporate equity in training teachers and in teaching students? Let's start with the training teachers and working with teachers. But I've heard all of you talk about data, but what else can you use?
I think any kind of interpersonal trainings around these issues is important. You know, a lot of times we talk about bias trainings and things like that. For those that don't know, I was a superintendent in Santa Monica, Malibu for 6 years. And then we introduced these concepts of equity and brought in some consultants. I mean, you would not believe the level of engagement and understanding where some huge structural changes occurred just because we took staff through their own bias trainings. And I would say that leaders need to be a part of those. Don't do this to them. Be a part of the journey. And the times that I sat in those meetings, and when people saw my own foibles and my own challenges in areas of equity or anything else, being honest about it, I just think it opened the doors for everybody else to do it. So I think as leaders, you demonstrated by being a part of it, but a conversation around issues of equity, accompanied with the data would help. Don't just go in there and just talking about the system was racist without having data there. Have it with you, and then you have that conversation around the data.
Got it. Dr. Spates, Dr. Dillman, anything you want to add?
I think reading, is powerful. Using book studies or using articles to engage people and have conversation. I think as just being an assistant principal at a site, being willing to be vulnerable. So similar to what Dr. Drati said, we recently had a conversation about grading, and we're in different places, but looking at our DNF data, and it opened up, parents and people who, parents who are teachers, right, at the site to say, no, it's more than just missing assignments, right? So using the text to engage teachers and being willing to be vulnerable about where you stand on issues, if you have the trust and the relationships with your staff.
Yeah. Dr. Dillman?
Agree with everything. The only thing I would add, one of the things that I've seen be very powerful when looking at data is to share some individual stories. When we can put face to some of these data points, and if teachers can share a story or even, let's look at one of these students who are struggling. Everyone knows one of these data points. So really finding out, digging down some individual stories. I think people are really moved, and that's what starts to change minds, are individuals and knowing their journey. But the data makes the conversation safe, and the data reveals the work to be done. And I also think including bias in big and little ways, like we're in hiring season, and across the district, we watch video about bias. I always share a story about myself where I have, fallen victim to this. Like now, USC is, I'm automatically going to think they're great and they're well trained, but it's those kinds of things where we have to, give pause and recognize how bias can come in small and big ways, but just to incorporate it into the fabric of the conversation.
I will add one more thing about data. Yeah. I know all three of us mentioned about data, and the importance of that is the only suggestion I would say, don't get stuck on just the traditional data you would look at. Ask questions and get data that you traditionally don't look at. For example, right now, my focus right now is on the teacher referrals and how we document that on an Aries, so we can pull the data later about our trends of why we are referring certain students and all that. That's huge information, but that's not a normal thing somebody would pull. But that's just a question that came to mind about behavior that are occurring at the sites. How do we capture these things? We think it's happening, we're not sure, but let's pull the data. And so there's all kinds of ways: student voice, parent voice. There's all kinds of different data, qualitative and quantitative data are areas you should look to.
Good. So this is going to be the last question, unless we have other questions from the audience. I work in a system of education. That system, it can be as small as the school or the classroom, excuse me, which I still argue is the most important unit in any school system. But then you got the school, you have small schools, medium schools, large schools, you have elementary, middle school, high school, and then you have the district, and then you have the system of education in California. So do you think, has it been your experience, do any of our systems connect us together in an intentional way and allow us to act on inequities? Or is that something that's going to require new thinking and new structures in our system in order for us to do that work?
Great question. I think the closest thing that aligns us right now is the LCAP process, if you use it right, if you use it the way it's intended to use. So that's one. But within the LCAP, there is a weakness. I do see that. I think you have to name the problem as hard as it is. You name the problem. The LCAP right now names English learners, foster youth, and socioeconomically disadvantaged students, because because the system did not want to name African Americans or Latinx specifically. That's important because I'm an English learner myself. But if you look at the English learner data, I just remember the resources poured toward me and with strategies, funding, and all that allowed me to catapult past my African American peers that I played football with in LA High. Had they, but when you go to a school site and say, what specifically are you planning for in terms of African Americans? That's not a question a lot of people are looking at. What do African Americans need? What do Latinx students need outside from the English learners, and so on? So I think once you name it, you start generating treatments towards it. Had the LCAP stated that in that way, that would have forced everybody to look into those, and then you would actually come up with strategies that we have to implement, just as we're doing with ELD strategies and everything else. And you see what happens when you name it. Look at all your EL scores versus your English only African Americans and English only Latinx students. And just look at their results compared to them, and you'll see a difference there. And I will say that has to do because we have named it and we have solutions towards it. Whereas if you just said everything, just a blanket statement of social economic disadvantage, okay, what is that? What are you supposed to do with that? And specific to those different subgroups. So yeah, great answer. I always thought when we are targeting our economically disadvantaged, some schools have a tendency to apply the Ruby Payne logic to it, which is very, very disastrous for children living in poverty. Dr. Spates and Dr. Dillman, anything you'd like to add to Dr. Drati's response?
Yes, I'm different than that. I think it would be great if, so when you think about, you shared, thinking about the system as a whole, so the education, I would love to see more university partnerships with either individuals or schools, so that we can sort of access the talent and the knowledge pool that exists in universities. So there's kind of a pipeline, where, we want to use text and research, but there really isn't an easy way to get research if you don't have access to a university. And then I would also love to sort of see more connections outside of systems. So, I'm at a middle school, love middle school. So I'd love to, whenever I hear a principal who's doing great work in middle schools, I write it down so I can chase them down later. But being able to work with in between systems so that we can learn from one another, especially ones that serve the same student population, similar to what Dr. Dillman said. So that's the same population. So we can't say that we can't serve these students well because they're doing it and it's happening at another school. So relationships with those schools as well.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dillman?
Yeah, similar to what Dr. Spates was just sharing. It's hard to kind of reconceptualize the system, and it feels so big and out of our control. But if we think about things we do have, like the LCAP or like the California dashboard, what if there was also a measure of students or schools or districts who've achieved, where they start to close those gaps, and there's some sort of connection for schools who need to close that same gap, that we can share best practices. There are districts that we've never heard of in our state that are doing great things, but we would have no idea that they're doing the great things that we need to be doing. So some sort of, I don't know, another part of measure who's done the thing you need to do.
Yeah, in my previous life as a superintendent, I would say, and Ben will laugh about this, that's the County Office of Education's responsibility. And there's a wide variety of expectations, competence, and experience that sits in county offices of ed that makes that system-wide throughout the state difficult. And Krishna, I'm going to take up your challenge and give you the fact that USC should partner with more schools. So under our new dean, we have created a significant partnership with LAUSD, and myself and some other professors are working with leadership development with site administrators all around equity. We just haven't made it out to Palmdale yet. So not saying that we won't, but I'm certain that we will. And before we conclude, I was wondering if we could have our final thought from each of our panelists on their work and about equity and what they see the future to be in relationship to their own work and the state of education in California. Start with Krishna Spates.
Thanks, Dr. Cash. That's a big question. I would just say, if you are called to be an educator, if you are called to be an equity warrior, be smart, pay attention to your context. Our students need you. We need you for the long term, not just for 1 year of great work that you'll do for students, but we need all of us for our entire career. And walk forward with fear, and pretty soon she's going to leave because you're going to keep doing what's right and moving forward for students and teachers.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Dr. Dillman.
Yes, that sure is a big question. I would say, remember why you got into education. The days sometimes are long, the years go by quickly, and all of a sudden, I'm a principal and it felt like I was a first-year teacher not too long ago. But hold on to what it's like to be a teacher, hold on to what got you in education, and make sure that you're still doing that work.
Great, thank you. Dr. Drati.
And I can't add more to what Dr. Spates and Dr. Dillman said, just to add that we are so essential to the survival of this country and democracy. And if we're not here, if you're not here, and if you give up because it's hard, just think about the alternative. What's happened in Florida and other places. And just think about the generations that are going to follow, given ill information, and just think about what will happen to a country. I mean, you watch all empires fall apart, whether it be the Roman Empire, Greek Empire. I've been watching a documentary on the Ottoman Empire lately. It's pretty interesting, but all of it is broken from within. Okay, it's broken because they never learned trends and how people related to each other and all that. So if you think about it, that's us. How do you equip the world to be able to survive? This country to be able to survive? It's really about us. So we need to always remember that when things get hard.
Wow. Well, I really want to thank Dr. Spate, Dillman, and Drati for spending time with us this afternoon. It's really been great for me. I learned a lot, and that's why I love being part of the leadership workshop series. And, you know, Drs. Spates and Dillman kind of had to be here because they're Trojans. But Dr. Drati, the only connection he has to USC, not the only, but one connection he has to USC is that as a Fresno State football player, his team beat USC in a bowl game. When he first met me, he made sure to show me his ring to make sure I knew that Fresno State beat USC. So
I wonder, man, did you take my ring? I've been looking for it, man. My ring, man.
no, I don't know where it is. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And again, thank Tom Artiaga for putting this together, and look forward for additional workshops that'll be coming your way. Dr. Dillman, Dr. Spates, Dr. Drati, thanks for your time and your expertise. I love all three of you very much, and you know that. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Fight on.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.